Hi there and welcome to iPad Basics 101, out-of-the-box tips for successful implementation. This webinar is going to focus on some of those basics of the iPad. How do I start to organise and manage information on my device? And also, what are some of the basics to do with the hardware? What do I need to know? There's not a lot of switches and buttons on the device, but what are the ones that I need to know about? We're also going to take a look at the general settings app, which is the one that you see there, that has got a lot of helpful information underneath it that will help you to successfully implement the device into your classroom. And we'll also take a look at the accessibility features that can help us to customize and individualize the device for our students with diverse learning needs. The idea for this webinar came about on our recent travels with the iPad tour because we realised that so many people are really new to the iPad, and even people who have been using it for a little while may not be familiar with all of the accessibility features that are included or all of the general settings that can really help you to make the device a success in your classroom with your individual students. So we decided to put together a webinar which covers these basics to get people up to speed with what they need to know out of the box. My name's Katie and I'm one of the speech pathologist with the Spectronics consultancy team, and the other members of my team include Greg O'Connor, Amanda Hartman and Charlene Cullen, and together we bring you a whole range of topics available on Spectronics Online on a number of different topics such as iPads and apps, using apps to create visual supports, using apps to create social stories, apps for students with autism. The list is just growing, and also we have a number of other webinars on other inclusive learning technologies, so I encourage you to take a look at this subscription service, which is spectronics.com.au/online. As I said, today we're going to be focused on the iPad basics, so I'll give you a brief tour of the hardware and the buttons and switches that are on the device. We'll then have a look at some tips and tricks for organising and managing your ever-growing collection of apps and data on your device. We'll take a look at restrictions as well, which is under the general settings, because this area a lot of people don't know about but can be really helpful in restricting access to various parts of the device for certain situations. So I'll explain what I mean by that later, and we'll take a brief look at multitasking gestures. But we're also going to touch on accessibility features. So what features are included on the device that can help our students with vision and hearing impairments? What features are available that can help my students with physical and motor disabilities? Things such as speak selection, which enables me to highlight text and have it spoken aloud, a lot of people don't know about, and it is included under the features for people with vision impairment. However, we know that hearing text spoken aloud can be really helpful for our students with reading difficulties and learning disabilities. We'll also look at one of the newest features, which is guided access, which has been included as part of the iOS 6 operating system. So I just means, you might hear the term iOS, which really just refers to a mobile device such as an iPhone, iPod, iPad. And OS stands for operating system, and currently the latest operating system is 6.1.3. We'll also take a look at Assistive Touch, which is a feature for people with physical and motor disabilities that can help to make access to the device a lot easier for these people. So I've just got an image of the device, the three sides of the device up there, just to go through the buttons and switches. Now, with the iPad, there are not a lot of buttons and switches and slides that you need to know about, but these are the ones that you will need to know. So number one refers to the home button. So that's that circle button with the square in it. I was in a training recently and they refer to it There is a school in Adelaide that refers to it as the squircle, but we're going to refer to it as the home button today. Number 2 is referring to the bottom of the device where the charging port is, so you put your charger into there. Number 3 is where a speaker is for the device. Number 4 refers to the sleep wake button on the device. Now this doesn't turn the device on or off, it just puts it into sleep or wake mode. In order to turn the device completely off, to power down the device, I need to hold that button for a longer period, and then it will come up with a message on the screen of the device to turn that off. Just a hint for those people who are flying and think they've turned their device off by hitting the sleep wake button. Number 5 refers to the camera that's located in the device. So that's on the back of the device there. Number 6 is the side switch, and we'll talk about the side switch coming up when we talk about iPad basics. Number 7 is the volume up, volume down switch. And then number 8, in the top left-hand corner on the top of the device, is where you can put your headphones into. So it's the audio out port there. So that's just a really brief tour of the hardware of the device. And let's get on to some of the basics now in terms of how do we organize and manage information as we start to collect more and more apps and data on our device. So to do that, I'm going to hit my home button and come out of my device and go to my home page. Now you'll notice there that I have some single apps and I also have some folders. So the folders have a number of apps within those folders. As I slide across, you'll see that the top part of the screen is sliding, but you'll see that the bottom apps are remaining the same. So they're apps that I use all the time, that I put down into my docking bar, that will remain the same, so that I have constant access to those. Now you'll notice the second one across there is called the Settings app, which we're going to explore in a lot more detail very soon. But I've got that included on my docking bar so that it's available all the time regardless of what screen I'm on up the top. However, if I was working in a classroom, I might hide that settings tab because, as you'll see, there's a whole heap of things that people can change and you may or may not want them to have easy access to that settings app. As I said, there's individual apps and also folders. Now, first up, I'm going to show you how to get all of my apps into what we call, well, what I like to call wiggle mode, but into sort of how we can organize the apps. So I'm going to just select on that readability app, and if I hold for long enough rather than just tap, you'll see that everything on the page goes into wiggle mode. And same if I scroll through to other pages, they'll still keep wiggling. Now what that means is that a little black circle with a white cross comes up, and that means that I can choose to delete an app. This will delete the app from my device and delete all of its data, and I might want to do this if I'm running out of space on my iPad and there are some apps that I don't use all the time. But I need to also be aware that I can get that app back at any time because I have it downloaded to my iTunes account. So once I've purchased the app, deleting it from here is not going to get rid of it entirely. I can still sync it back to my device at any time. It's just to free up some space if you're not using the app all the time. Let's cancel that. Now, to get them into those folders that you see, what I want to do is hold on the app and drag it onto another app, and you'll see that it automatically creates a folder for me. I can then go into that text box and call it whatever logical name will make sense to me. Okay. If I ever want to go back to change the name of that folder, I can come in here when it's in that what we call wiggle mode, I can come in here and I can just highlight the text and rename it whatever I need it to be called. Okay. To get it out of that wiggling mode, what I need to do is hit the home button, which is that circle with a square in it. If I hit the home button, you'll see that they all stop moving, and now when I swipe, they are stationary and I can no longer move things. I can only select things. Okay. If I want to move things, I have to hold down on the app and I can move it to another page. I can move it into a folder, for example. I can move the app to be wherever I want it to be. So that's when we're in that wiggling mode. Okay. As I said, that bottom dock there is where I want to store the apps that I use the most. If I want to change what's on that bottom dock, what I can do is, again, pop it into wiggle mode and drag it down. Now I've got the maximum number of apps allowed in my docking bar, so I'm going to have to move it out of my docking bar first, and then I think you're allowed a maximum of 6. And then I can put it down into my docking bar, and so it will remain in my docking bar when I swipe through the pages. So if I can have any minimum there, but if I can have a maximum of 6 available in the docking bar there. Again, to get it out of that mode, I just select the home button and they'll all stop jiggling. Now, as you can see, as you start to collect apps, you will get a whole heap of apps in your device, and sometimes it's hard to remember where you've stored them and how you've organized them within the folders, because some apps can be good for a couple of different purposes and your filing system may not be fabulous. So what I want you to do is, when you're on your home button, home screen I should say, if you hit your home button once more, it will take you into what's called Spotlight Search. Now, as I start to type, you can see that anything that matches that search term will come up. So at the top there I have an app, then I have a couple of notes there that have that search term in it. I also have a task that's related to that, and also I can search the web for that using the Safari app. Now, I can also define what this Spotlight search will look for. So if I want to, let me go into, now I'm going to go into my Settings app, which is the second one along that's got all the cogs in the docking bar there. Settings app. We're going to be going in and out of this Settings app quite a bit. But you see halfway down, you've got Spotlight Search. If I go into Spotlight Search, I can choose and define what my device will search for when using that Spotlight Search. So if I just want it to search for my applications, I can turn off all of those, go back out, hit my home button from my home screen, start to type again, and now you'll see that it's only searching for apps within my device. So depending on what your needs are. Okay. If I double click so we've showed you what happens when you hit the home button once, it brings up the Spotlight search. But what happens if I double click the home button? You'll see along the bottom there that it brings up my most recently used apps. So it grays everything else out, but it brings up my most recently used app. It's like a history of the apps that I use. I use this all the time rather than always going into the Spotlight search or always trying to find the app within my folder. I will know that it's an app that I've recently used, and so I'll double click the home button, to get into this history bar. If I swipe to the left of that, it will bring up our audio toolbar. So here is where I can mute the device on the left-hand side there. I can change the brightness of the screen. I can play music, rewind music, forward music. That next button there, which is blue, is just a mirroring button, which is what I'm using to mirror my device onto my laptop screen, so you won't have that if you're not doing that. The next one there is the volume slider, and then a direct access to my music there as well. So that's if I slide left. If I slide right, it just gives me the next most common, most recently used apps that I've been using. Now, if I'm wanting to, let's just go back in there for a moment. If I'm wanting to clear the history of apps that I've used, when it's displayed, I can hold down on my apps, and you'll notice that instead of the black circle with a white cross, I'm now getting a red circle with a white minus. Now what this does is it just closes the app down completely. So they're not running in the background, which can have implications for your battery life. So if you find that your batteries, because it's almost like the apps are still running in the background, so this will force close those apps. So if I close all of those, it's not deleting them as it would have with the black circle with the white cross. It's just deleting them from my most recently used list, which will also close those apps down. One other thing that I just want to show you in terms of basics is, remember the side switch that I referred to in the hardware? I'll just go back to that so you can take a look. The side switch that we're referring to, is that number 6 there. So not the volume up and down slider, it's the one up above that. Now, when you get your device, the default for that side switch is to have it so that it mutes the device. But we already know another way of muting the device. If we double click and left, then we can mute the device this way, mute on, mute off. Now that can be useful, but what I find most useful is if you're finding that when you're turning the device, or when a child's accessing the device and they accidentally tilt it the wrong way, it will change orientation. So it will go from vertical to horizontal, and it can be fairly distracting for some of the kids that we're working with. If we go into settings, so again going into that COGS app, and we go to side switch, just scroll down and see in the right hand viewport there, use side switch to either lock rotation or to mute. So mute is the default, but I always like to have the option to lock the rotation. So what that means is, what I can do is to lock my rotation, and you can see that it's got a little lock in there, and then whichever way I move my device, it's not going to change that orientation. If I unlock it, then it will be able to change that orientation. So that is a tip that I have found really useful, because sometimes that can be really distracting for some of the kids that we're working with. While we're in the general settings app, I want to alert you to the restrictions area. So just the last one there in the right hand viewport that you can see is restrictions. Now this is sometimes referred to as the parental control section of the iPad, but it can be really useful when you're managing iPads for a number of children in the classroom, because it does allow you to restrict access to various parts of the iPad. Now it is password enabled, so if we select on, it will ask for my password, and you'll all see my password probably. But once in there, once you've assigned a password in there, you'll see that you can allow or restrict access to some of the apps that are shown there. So, for example, Safari, which is the web browsing app, I can turn access to that on or off. So, for example, in an assessment situation, I might want to restrict access to that app, and I can do that in here. So it's not going to get rid of the app, it's just going to hide the app. I can also restrict access to the camera. So if I'm working with someone who is completely preoccupied with the camera and uses it constantly and doesn't do anything else on the device, I can restrict access in there to the camera. I can also, you can see a few other things there, but I can also restrict access to installing or deleting apps. Now this can be really helpful because we can turn off the ability to install an app, and we can also turn off the ability to accidentally or maybe on purpose delete an app. So we wouldn't be able to delete an app from the device. If I scroll down a little bit further, you'll see that in that second box there, it's about the ratings, but then the second last one, in-app purchases. A lot of the apps that we get, particularly the ones that are free or light versions of apps, will constantly come up with the ability to purchase the full version within the app. This, turning it off in here, in the restrictions, will stop that from happening, stop the ability to be able to purchase in-app. That require password as well. You can see it's for requiring a password for purchases, and the default for that is 15 minutes. However, if we go into that option, you can see that we have the option of changing it to immediately. So this can be really useful because it means that it will ask us for our password every time we want to purchase an app, not just after 15 minutes. So usually when you purchase an app through iTunes or the App Store, or you purchase music or movies, it will ask you for your password. Now what that's saying is that it won't ask you for your password again until after 15 minutes of inactivity. Whereas I can change it to immediately, so every purchase needs to have the password, which can be really useful if you leave your device unattended and within that 15 minutes, you know, you've got kids who have downloaded their latest movies and music, etc. Okay, I think that's all I'll share within the restrictions area, but a really useful area of the device to know about. Back into general settings here, you'll see that I have multitasking gestures turned on. Now, it's a bit difficult for me to demonstrate showing this on using reflections, using the mirroring, because you can't actually see what I'm doing, but it explains it there. So you can use 4 or 5 fingers to pinch to the home screen, swipe up to reveal the multitasking bar, swipe left or right between apps. So what that means is if I'm within an app, if I just go into an app here, if I use a 4 or 5 finger pinch, it will bring me back to my home screen. If I'm in an app and I use a 4 or 5 finger swipe on my device, it will take me to the area of the device that I was in beforehand. So I can swipe between the apps that I was using. And also if I'm on the home screen and I use a 4 or 5 finger swipe up, it will bring up that multitasking bar as well. Now, just a couple of other quick things. You may or may not know that you can take a screen capture of anything that is on your device and it will save it into your camera roll. And the way that you do that is by holding the home button, so number one there, the circle with the square inside, and the sleep wake button down at the same time. When you do this, you'll hear a screenshot, like a camera being activated. And what that does is it will take a screenshot of anything that's on your screen and save it directly into your camera roll. Now this can be really useful because if you're working on an app and you've just created a fabulous, let me just get into my photos here, you've just created a fabulous toka boka lady who's all dressed up in her finest. What I can do, if that's on my screen, I can hold the sleep wake button down and the home button and take a screenshot of that, and it will save it directly into my camera roll. Similarly, if I'm looking up a map, for example, and I want to take a screenshot of it, anything that's on my screen I can take a screenshot and it will be saved directly into my camera roll for me to use within other apps or to email, for example. Just two more tips and tricks with the Safari app. If we go into our web browsing Safari app here, for some websites that you might want to access all the time, what I can do is create a visual bookmark for it. So if I select up in the top toolbar there, you'll see that the third option across, which is the square with the arrow coming out of it, if I select that, you'll see that it has a number of options for me to do. So I can copy that link, I can bookmark that link, but I can also add it to my home screen. And if I add it to my home screen, this is for a website that I might use all the time, Simple Wikipedia. If I add, you'll see that it comes up with almost an app looking icon, which is a really good visual reminder for some of the kids that we're working with literacy difficulties, as a way to access that website directly. Okay, so now let's take a look at some of the accessibility features that can really help you to customize and individualize the device for the students that you're working with diverse learning needs. To do this, I'm going to go back into my settings app, which is on my device, the second one along the docking bar there. We have gone into this before when we were looking at restrictions, etc. Now in the right-hand viewport, to find accessibility, you need to scroll almost to the bottom and you then have the options of accessibility. And when you go into here, you can see that it's categorized under accessibility features for people with vision impairment, for people with hearing impairment, for people with a learning difficulty, and for people with physical and motor. And then we've got triple click. Now I'll explain what that is. The first one that I'm going to show you today is VoiceOver. And what VoiceOver does is it will allow people with visual impairments to access the device because it will speak out everything that you touch on the device. Now you might automatically think, oh, that's going to be fabulous for some of the kids that I'm working with reading difficulties, but it was designed for people with visual impairments, and it can be very difficult and very cognitively complex to operate effectively. So before you turn that on, there's one thing that I want you to do is to scroll down to triple click, and under here we're going to assign what we want to happen when we triple click the home button. So let's go in there and you can see that you've got options, and make sure that your VoiceOver is selected. Because once you're in VoiceOver, once you've turned it on, if you don't know VoiceOver and you're not familiar with it, it can be very, very difficult. Let's go back now and scroll up and go to voiceover, and I'll just show you what happens when we turn voiceover on.
Voiceover on. Settings. Landscape. Brightness and wallpaper. Button. Messages. Button. Voiceover on.
So you'll see that anything that I touch on the screen,
accessibility, back button,
will be spoken aloud. It won't be selected unless I double tap on the screen.
Setting, vision, heading. Voiceover on, button.
Now you can kind of tell if you have a go yourself that it is fairly difficult to get your head around this when you first start using it. You need to select anywhere on the screen.
Remind, brightness in live voiceover on button.
And select it and double click it to select it. I'm going to turn that off.
Voiceover off.
But if you get stuck, because we assigned voiceover to one of the things that are asked for when we triple click our home button, if I triple click our home button, you'll see that under accessibility options you have the ability to turn voiceover on or off there.
Voiceover on, settings, landscape.
And we can turn it off there.
Voiceover off.
So it's a much more direct way of turning it on or off if you get stuck somewhere in your device and you can't get back into the settings. Okay, so Zoom will zoom the part of the screen that you select. Large text does exactly what it says and is suitable obviously for people with visual impairment. Invert colors will change the device from being a black text on a white background to being lighter text on a dark background. So for some people with visual impairment, that can be important. Speak selection is probably one of the ones that we use the most when supporting students with learning difficulties and reading and writing difficulties. What that does is its default is to be off, but I think this should be on for all of the students that we're working with, regardless of their reading and writing abilities. If we select speak selection, you can see once we turn it on, we can go in and have a look at the dialects that are available, which is a recent update to this. But what this does, if I come back out and go into my notes, and I just have a note written here, if I hold on the text with my finger, it will highlight one word. If I then extend that highlight by extending the borders, when I have speak selection turned on, you'll see that it has the option to speak. And when I select that button, let me just make it a bit shorter. When I select that button,
a snake is a member of about 19 reptile families, suborder serpents, order Squamata, that has no limbs, voice, ears, or eyelids. They also have a long, slender body, too.
So now that text is spoken aloud. Perfect for people with reading difficulties, great for people who need to hear and see the text spoken aloud to increase their comprehension. So that's speak selection, which is a fabulous accessibility feature for a lot of the children that we're supporting. If we go into Safari and we go to, say, this Wikipedia page, which is actually a simple English Wikipedia page, so the content is a lot more, the vocabulary used is a lot more plain English than those that are on the traditional Wikipedia site. Again, we can use speak selection to highlight our text and have it spoken aloud.
A snake is a member of about 19 reptile families, suborder serpents, order Squamata, that has no limbs, voice, ears, or eyelids. They also have a long, slender body, too.
So you can also see that it's highlighting the word as it is read aloud, and you can turn that on or off depending on the needs of your students. Whilst we're on this page, you might notice that some web pages that we look at have the option up in the address bar to turn a reader on. Now what that does is it will strip the page of all of the navigational buttons and just concentrate on the content. So what happens when I select reader is it will just give me the content. I can then make my text larger or smaller, and I can use something like speak selection to speak, I won't hear it again, but to speak that text aloud.
About 19 reptile families.
Okay, let's go back into our settings app and just show you within speak selection that you can turn the highlighting words on or off depending on the needs of your students as to whether they need that visual feedback. Under hearing, you've got mono audio, so whether you want to adjust and also whether you want to adjust the volume balance between the left and right channels. But I'm more concerned with underneath guided access, and this is a recent addition to the iOS 6 operating system. So for those people who haven't got this option, will mean that you have to update your device to the latest operating system. To do that, you go back into General, and you can see here if there's a software update available, it will be under the software update saying my software is up to date. But if you don't have the iOS 6, you won't have guided access. Guided access, I'll just go back into accessibility. Guided access will help me to keep the iPad in a single app, or just enable the student to access various parts of the app. So, for example, let me go back into my notes. We've got a note here, and I'm working with a student who might accidentally delete that note by selecting that bin down in the bottom toolbar there. So I want to restrict access to that part of the screen, and I also want to restrict access to other notes because I don't want him to read the other notes. If I triple click and select guided access, what it will do is almost reduce what's on the screen so that I can restrict access to various parts of the screen. So if I just draw a circle around what I don't want him to access, don't want him to add a new note, and I don't want him to access these toolbars. Also, hardware button, so the home button will always be off when guided access is turned on so that they can't exit out of the app. He's locked into that app. Select start. Now you'll see that those parts of the screens, if I touch them, the parts that are grey aren't able to be accessed. I can still access what's not grey, but I can't access the things that are grey. This also has implications for the students that we're working with communication difficulties, who are using the device as a communication device. What it means is that we can lock them into a single app so that their device then becomes a dedicated communication device. To turn guided access off, we triple click our home button, and it's passcode enabled. So when we put our passcode on, we can then we can end our guided access, and again, access everywhere on our device. The last thing I want to show you is Assistive Touch. And Assistive Touch allows you to perform various actions on the device even if you have physical or motor difficulties and can only access the device either using one finger or using an assistive technology tool such as a stylus or a head pointer. Let's turn that on and see what happens. So what happens is you'll see that this grey square with a white circle has appeared on the screen. Now what it will do is dock itself to the side of the screen, but I can move it around the screen as well. If I select that, it gives me some options of performing various actions. So you'll see that down the bottom there, I can select home and it will take me to my home page, like I have just selected the home button. If I select home again, it will take me to my spotlight search, like I have selected the home button. However, I've selected it on screen just with one finger. I haven't had to manipulate that home button myself physically. If I go into device, you can see I can do a whole lot more. I can lock the rotation of the screen without having to access the side switch. I can rotate my screen, I can unlock the rotation, I can turn my volume up and my volume down without having to access the volume up, volume down switch physically on the side of my device. I can do all of this with just one finger or with an assistive tool such as a head pointer or stylus. I can also get the multitasking bar up. I can take a screenshot of the device, and I can even create my own custom gestures. So if I go back and I go into favorites, you can see that I've created my own custom gestures. So I can perform a 5-finger pinch just with one finger, and I can create a new one there as well. It will learn my custom gesture that I do and what that means to do, what I want that gesture to do. So that can be really useful for some of the people that we're working with who are finding it difficult to physically access the device. Okay, so just to recap, we've showed you some of the hardware buttons and switches on the device. We've also showed you some tips and tricks on organising and managing information on your device. We've looked at the restrictions area and how that can be really useful for implementing the devices into the classroom and restricting access to various functions and parts of the device. And we've taken a look at the multitasking gestures and how we can turn that on or off under the General Settings tab. We've also looked at some of the accessibility features, including speak selection, guided access, and assistive touch that can be helpful for people with vision and hearing difficulties, physical and motor difficulties, but also a lot of the diverse learners that we support with reading difficulties or writing difficulties. Just to finish up, whilst we haven't talked much about apps that are available for the device, I do want to point you in the direction of some of the apps lists, because once you're familiar with some of the basics for your iPad, you might want to start to add some content. If you work in special education settings, then we have an apps for special education list that is brought to you by our Spectronics consultancy team, and what we do is evaluate the apps that we put up on our list. So we talk about what's good about them, what accessibility features they're compatible with, etc., etc. So I'd encourage you to take a look at the apps for special education list. There's also an apps for literacy support list, so if you're supporting students with literacy difficulties, that also evaluates apps according to different fields. And lastly, the apps for AAC list. So again, if you're supporting someone with complex communication needs who you're looking at an app for augmentative and alternative communication. We hope you've found this webinar useful, and as I mentioned earlier, please check out spectronics.com.au/online for a number of other topics, not just iPad and app related, but inclusive technologies in general. And if you want to immerse yourself in some learning, why not check out our Inclusive Learning Technologies Conference, which is coming up in May of 2014. And we've got 6 awesome keynote presenters now confirmed, with more details available on our website. If you're not part of our online community, we really encourage you to become part of our Spectronics group on Facebook. We're also on Twitter, and up on that spectronics.com.au/blog, you'll find a heap of resources for implementing iPads into the classroom, and we really encourage you to take a look at all of the free resources that are available up there. If you're interested in having some on-site or online training, or even some hands-on training in your school, please take a look at our website also, or for more information you can contact consultants at spectronics.com.au. Thanks for attending, and we look forward to seeing you in more webinars.